On the 24th of May 2024, the Hay Festival, a literary festival that has more than 100,000 visitors a year and have hosted famous authors like David Mitchell, Sarah Pascoe and Tom Holland, no, not that Tom Holland the historian, suspended one of their biggest financial sponsors for the event, Baillie Gifford. Doing so has meant they have highly jeopardised the future of the literary festival going on for next year. Less than 2 weeks go by, and by the 6th of June 2024, Baillie Gifford cancels the sponsorship for all the literary festivals it had been sponsoring, some for as long as the last 20 years. This piece of controversy has come to a head in 2024, but this row concerning the sponsorship of literary festivals has been brewing since August 2023. Started by the eco-activist collective called Fossil Free Books. And in fact, this controversy with Baillie Gifford is actually just another addition to a current trend amongst some of the authoritative bureaucrats of literature. You know, the heads of the prestigious literary societies, the judges of awards, the directors and administrators of literary festivals. Essentially, the vanguards and spearheads of literature, who are often important and established writers themselves, that are supposedly acting in the best interests of good literature and inevitably using their cultural prominence and financial support to influence the taste of the public through these awards, festivals, and societies. And what is this trend? It's the trend of allowing thoughtless politics and hidden agendas to take precedent over supporting the integrity of literature, the freedom of speech, free expression within the arts, and the opportunity to develop and protect writers, even for those who don't fall in line. A good place to start then is with the current broiling schism silently threatening the existence of one of the longest running literary societies in the UK, the Royal Society of Literature. And as expected from, and I say this in the best way possible, a bunch of grown-up book nerds, this latest internal dispute stems not from something that was read, but because of an article that was not. Created in 1820 to, quote, reward literary merit and excite literary talent, the Royal Society of Literature is a long-established society and cultural charity that has in previous years championed exciting, profound and at times controversial literature. They boast of an illustrious array of previous fellows. Previous because they are dead, and funding for all post-mortal cultural societies ran out once civilization stopped giving an allowance to their deceased, and more existent fellows like Kazuo Ishiguro and Margaret Atwood. Throughout the years, they've continued to influence their view of good literature on the public through their administration of various prestigious literary awards like the V.S. Pritchett Short Story Prize for Best Unpublished Short Story and the Companions of Literature Awards, all used to support new and established authors. However, recently, their support of good literature above all other considerations was called into question when on Thursday, the 16th of February this year being 2024 for all of you intergalactic historians seeing this video in 200 years' time, an open letter to the Times Literary Supplement was instigated by a long-standing literary critic, Jeremy Trigan, and signed by 14 other prominent writers, including pretty well-known ones like Ian McEwan, Yasmin Alibai Brown, and Alan Hollinhurst. In this open letter, the writers were urging the Literary Society to refer itself to the Charity Commission due to their understanding that the administrative level of the RSL was attempting to censor an article, something they believe plainly contravened fundamental literary values. They also complained of the RSL's efforts to suppress criticism from other fellows, as well as from members of the council, which is the elected body within the society who can elect new fellows and overall direct the RSL's activities. This letter was not the first time the administrators of the RSL were hearing a complaint, according to the open letter. A previous private letter was sent on Friday, January the 26th, to the Society's director, Molly Rosenberg, wanting to discuss their concerns in a confidential meeting. But they were declined an audience, saying that the matter couldn't be discussed before the next council meeting, which was scheduled almost a month away on the 20th of February. Seeing this as an unreasonable amount of time to wait to discuss an active issue, they decided to send the open letter to the Times literary supplement, which I'm starting to see as the literary establishment's equivalent of an ex blocking you on social media, so you have to head to TikTok to bring your complaints to strangers. What was this article about that made a bunch of writers arm their pens, or ready their fingers to their keyboards? Well, from the first open letter, we discover nothing much, except vague implications of censorship. A month later, and evidently the council meeting, which eventually happened on February the 21st, didn't calm down the concerns of censorship these writers had. Another open letter was written and sent to the prominent newspaper, The Times, this time with 70 consignatory writers, including Rose Treyman, Kazuo Ishigo, Don Patterson, and Margaret Atwood. This open letter threw down the metaphorical and imaginatively rendered gauntlet. Sent on Wednesday, the 6th of March, this open letter revealed another piece of the puzzle. There was an article which had caused the whole of the RSL annual magazine to be suspended from its original release date in December 2023, despite it being in its final proof. This article seemed to have been victim to managerial interference due to containing a passage sympathetic to Palestinians. Let me just mention that the whereabouts of this elusive upcoming edition of this magazine will be discussed a little later, because something very strange is going on with it, and it does bear mentioning. More information has been made known. The editor of the RSL literary magazine for 7 years, Maggie Ferguson, has been allegedly fired, allegedly due to this article. And what does the RSL say about these claims? Well, they claim that the magazine was postponed for editorial improvements and that Ferguson departed on mutual agreement. In fact, she'd always known this would be the last issue she would edit. Which really does explain everything. Or it would if Ferguson agreed with these statements of events. But Ferguson categorically denies these claims, especially any suggestion that she'd had prior knowledge of her leaving her editorial post at the RSL, which gives a little bit more credence to the open letter's concerns that the society may be using its managerial control to suppress criticisms against them. Then, on Friday the 8th of March, 2 days after the second open letter, Bernardine Evaristo, writer and the current president of the RSL, wrote an article for The Guardian. In the article, she disparages the claims of, amongst other things, the censorship of the upper management of the society. She says that there is no question that the current leadership believe in the matter of freedom of speech. For some reason, only clear in her mind, she places the phrase in speech marks, which doesn't help any of the speculation that she is subtly ridiculing the existence of the term, or its importance in the literary landscape. But I digress. She carries on. However, the society has a remit to be a voice for literature, not to present itself as the voice of its 700 fellows, surely a dangerous and untenable concept. It cannot take sides in writers' controversies and issues, but must remain impartial. This last statement was taken particularly not well by the dissenting faction of the society, as it calls to mind another instance where the RSL seemed to make shadowy agendas a bigger and more important consideration than protecting an author's right to creativity and expression that is without the risk of mortal harm. And really, this previous event might be the real source of the fissure the RSL is currently going through. In this way, this deep scar, freshly open, was first cut on August the 12th, 2022. It's a summery and warm Friday morning in New York. Salman Rushdie, a writer of celebrated works such as Midnight's Children and Victory City, was on stage at the Chautauqua Institute to give a talk in dreadful, ironic hindsight about the violence against writers. In approximately 27 seconds, Rushdie was stabbed 15 times, resulting in injuries including the loss of an eye and the use of a hand. The attack on Rushdie was not enacted because the assailant did not take kindly to Rushdie's use of magical realism or his lengthy descriptions, but it was enacted because of his writing. Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses was published in 1988 and was quickly accused of as being blasphemous due to its reference to the Satanic Verses, verses that the Islamic prophet Muhammad allegedly mistook for divine revelation. The book was, and still is, banned in many Islamic majority countries, and a fatwa, a type of religious legal judgment, called for the death of Rushdie, which 33 years later was very likely the reason for the attack. A year and a half later, we're back to the present day, and on reading that the RSL is to remain, quote-unquote, impartial in, again to quote, writers' controversies and issues, Rushdie tweeted a pleasantly barbed inquiry. Just wondering if the Royal Society of Literature is impartial about attempted murder. Bernadine Evaristo replied in a tweet that she wasn't talking about Rushdie in her article, kind of in the way you say after you've been caught gossiping behind someone's back, and commented that the Royal Society of Literature put out 2 statements in support of the writer, along with a personal tweet. Where these statements are is for any person to guess, because with all the searching a reasonably technologically savvy person can do on the internet, I personally have come up with none of these supposedly public statements Evaristo speaks of. The defence that the Royal Society of Literature is impartial to politics and so is to remain impartial even concerning the attempted assassinations, real and or social, of writers is understandably confusing when we take into account that the Society is, in terms of its administration and management, clearly partial to social and political agendas. In stating how the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Literature works, the RSL website states that they are active in wishing to tackle historic underrepresentation in literature at the RSL. Whether you agree with this motive or not, and it is fair to say that the RSL has lacked certain demographics simply due to the culture in the past, and that great literature doesn't necessarily have to be from a person of an upper class Caucasian background. It is clear that those social political concerns, such as lack of representation of people of colour, working class, and LGBTQIA+, is something they care about as an organisation, in this case, coming out in practice as affirmative action. Again, whether you agree with affirmative action or not is really not what I care about. I'm highlighting the basic fact that the RSL obviously has political and social agendas they are working towards, and Evaristo very much sees the creation of literature as a social political matter. In an article with Vogue last year, Evaristo stated that literature exists in relationship to personal, cultural, educational, geographical, political, and historical intersections that typically shape writers' preoccupations and aesthetics. That is to say, the background and beliefs of the person writing the book should be considered just as much, and one can argue more so, as what is in the book itself. And though the president of the RSL doesn't control the leadership of the charity by herself, seeing her own views is a good indication of where the direction the organisation would likely go if there was enough cooperation for her desire. And so what if there was a way to get that cooperation? Well, if it was me, and I wanted to avoid obvious detection, I would manipulate the composition of the voters. In the Guardian article I mentioned before, published on the 8th of February, Evaristo pushes back against the idea that the way the RSL chose new fellows to join the society has not changed, despite claims otherwise. As always, the potential fellows of the society must have published or produced at least 2 substantial works, both of which have to be of outstanding literary merit. The problem is how outstanding literary merit is determined is at the discretion of the council making the choice. And of course, the vice presidents, president and president emeriti can review the nominations, which may be as good as saying veto. I don't know if it is, but again, the problem is, who knows? The administrative leadership don't tell the public, or evidently the writers within their society. So despite Evaristo's insistence that the president has no say in the affairs of the running of the society, I can't believe that is entirely true. Or I have no evidence to suggest that's entirely true. And it also brings up another good question. On what basis are new fellows being chosen if the quality of their literature is not the only merit by which they are picked? And we know that the RSL takes into consideration more than the quality of the literature. In 2018, they had a scheme where they made 40 writers under 40 years old a fellow of the society in order to combat historical underrepresented demographics. If we follow the logic, these new fellows, chosen maybe on the basis of their political beliefs, can subsequently choose other fellows who are also willing to toe the line, accepting and propagating the same agenda the original instigators may have. Evaristo dismissively disagrees how the older generation of fellows are being sidelined, stating in her article that even today only 4% of the fellowship is under 40, while more than 55% of it is over 65 and more than 34% is over 75. Sidelined? Clearly not. Call it a conspiracy theory, but one can't help thinking that it's not the ages of these young fellows that is the main point of contention, but their concept that politics must influence one's literature, that who the literature is written by takes precedent over what the literature is trying to say, and that her saying clearly not is silently clearly not yet. Obviously, as an outsider of this illustrious society, I don't know the motivations of the administration in control of the RSL. Though to be fair, it doesn't seem that those inside this illustrious society have much more insight than I do. What does seem to be the case is that the administrative leaders of the RSL are politically minded behind the scenes, and yet refuse to disavow politically motivated attacks against writers or allow their writers a platform to express their own views as a demonstration of their freedom of thought, creativity, and expression. As long as the article is not calling for violence on anyone, then I think it's completely wrong to censor the writer's opinion within the article, wherever they stand on the conflict. Expressing difficult, nuanced, and controversial ideas is one of the main purposes of literature and intellectual thought, and it's the responsibility of those who manage those literary institutions to allow them to be voiced without threat or censorship. Overall, the politics allegedly hampering some of the writers within the RSL is dumb in the literary way. It's wordless and makes the writers wordless. From everything I've read about this row in the Royal Society of Literature, and I've read a lot for this video, I've gotten the sense that the upper management of the RSL is like the magistrates of Kafka's The Trial, who act beyond all understanding except their own, use complicated twisting of words to argue their point, and stubborn bureaucratic obfuscation when all else fails, all done to undermine both the writer not inside the fold and their confidence to say what needs to be said within their fiction or essays, already in a state of perpetual nervousness by the prospect of public opinion. You know what writers are like. And what of this elusive magazine that was promised? Well, some news articles I've read stated that the RSL annual review magazine has been postponed to spring. Others state the end of March. Spring has truly sprung and in fact has blossomed into halcyon June, and we still haven't seen this annual review, which is becoming more of a retrospective edition by the day. In her Guardian article, Evaristo expresses rather sternly that the RSL's reviews' publication was postponed and it will appear soon in full. How soon that is will probably be determined in the same way the phrase outstanding literary merit is, that is to say, behind closed doors and with no explanation of their reasoning. And before I move on, here's a little experiment you can quickly do. Just look up Royal Society of Literature Annual Review. Though there's the saying that nothing is forgotten on the internet, it seems that's not completely true, at least for a society as apparently deep-pocketed as the RSL. I can tell you that I am very adept at Googling, and not one search came up to say any previous edition of the RSL annual review even existed on this mortal realm. You'll only find articles on the controversy of the upcoming edition not being published, but even their website has no mention of previous RSL review editions. I think they wiped the whole lot, boys and girls, or at least hidden pages and pages of their content, lest the lecherous eyes of journalists and freelancers get a hold of something untoward. Of course, this is allegedly, but I find it very strange that the most recent mention of any articles pertaining to the RSL annual review dates back to 2017. This complete lack of online presence is despite their advertising in their membership joining page that members have free access to the RSL annual review both in print and online, which of course suggests there's an online access to the RSL review that can be paid for. I can't find it. Maybe you can. If you do, comment down below and I'll be interested in how you did it and how clandestine the method was. At the same time, the RSL was fracturing from within, another controversy was boiling, this time centering the die-hard sci-fi community and their outrage against the administrative team interfering with the results of the 2023 Hugo Awards. This next story uses the simpler, more common version of dumb politics. The administrative body's alleged political motivations are clear to distinguish, and they were very clearly made to hamper the opportunities of certain writers. The difference here being, in executing those motivations, the results were, frankly, stupid. From the mild, polite shores of Britannia to the energetic and picturesque city of Chengdu. On a comfortably cold evening on Saturday, October 21st, 2023, the wide and futuristic designed World Science Fiction Convention stage was set to announce the Hugo Awards for the best sci-fi literature of the past year. The sowing in anticipation for this harvest had been done. Members of the World Science Fiction Society had nominated and voted for works they deemed worthy of the prestigious prize, and the Hugo Award Committee then collected those nominations, tallied their votes, and conducted eligibility checks. But what sounds like a simple, if not a time-intensive procedure to complete, in fact, has sparked outrage and called into question the very integrity of the Hugo Awards and their purported desire to champion great sci-fi literature. The night pressed on until the moment sci-fi fans had been waiting for arrived, the Best Novel Award. This year, it had gone to Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, a quirky, imaginative fairy tale quest story about a princess going to kill a prince. A fine win, people thought, and this story should have ended there. The last thing to do, sci-fi fans thought, was to review this year's nomination statistics, to see how their favourite read that year compared with other works, to console themselves with how close they came to winning the title. And so they waited for the statistics to be released. Usually not an arduous task, though the rules of the award stated that the statistics must be released within 90 days of the convention. They have historically been released the next day. So fans waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. And on Saturday, the 20th of January 2024, the committee, utilising the full 90 days allowed for the statistics to remain unpublicised, the statistics finally came, and immediately things seemed off. For one of the biggest and most positively reviewed sci-fi books in 2023, R.F. Kuang's Babel, was deemed ineligible for, well, reasons unknown at this point in the timeline. This is despite the fact that Babel received enough initial votes to progress to the next stage of the polling. Lack of quality is unlikely to be the answer because this same book won Fiction Book of the Year at the 2023 British Book Awards. R.F. Kuang was not the only one found ineligible for the awards. Among other strange exclusions, an episode of the Netflix drama The Sandman, based on Neil Gaiman's comic book of the same name, was found ineligible for the Best Dramatic Presentation category, despite receiving enough votes to be on the final ballot. The author, Shiran J. Zhao, was ineligible for the Astounding Award for Best New Writer, and Paul Weimer was excluded from the Best Fan Writer category, again despite receiving enough votes to be shortlisted. Instantly suspicious, people started to ask questions why these writers were inexplicably disqualified for being considered for the Hugo Awards, especially since no information had been provided with the release of the award statistics explaining why expulsions were happening in the competition. Though some correlations were already being made, the location of the 2023 Worldcon being a vital hint. Kuang is a Chinese-American writer who has previously gender-swapped Mao Zedong in one of her novels. Also a Chinese-American, Zhao's debut series is a queer mythic reinterpretation of medieval China. Neil Gaiman has publicly criticized the Communist Party of China's imprisonment of writers, and Weimer has visited Tibet, which has a complicated and controversial history as an autonomous state within the Republic of China. As you can see, those excluded could be interpreted as being in some way unsuitable for the Communist Party of China's taste. Of course, these accusations are outrageous. Administrative interference for the purpose of censorship? Far be it. Good thing that Dave McCarthy, the head of the 2023 Hugo Award Committee, set out to put everyone's concern to rest. McCarthy, posting on the Hugo Committee Facebook page, states there was no communication between the Hugo administration team and the Chinese government in any official manner, and that after reviewing the constitution and the rules we must follow, the administration team determined those works/persons were not eligible. And what were these rules which the administration team must follow, people reasonably inquired? McCarthy declined to answer this, and I can picture him, comfortable bureaucrat he is, as being quite vexed that people are not content to hear that a managerial body has deemed rules as rules and are unwilling to follow their unilateral judgments without explanation or discourse. Like in our previous case with the RSL controversy, things start to make more sense when information those involved would rather keep hidden is brought to light. Almost a month was spent in tense speculation on all the forums and blogs, in articles and social media posts. Then, on Wednesday the 14th of February 2024, emails between the admin team were leaked by Chris M. Barkley and Jason Stanford, both journalists and themselves sci-fi writers. What these emails revealed confirmed our concerned sci-fi fans' suspicions. In one of the emails, dating back to the 5th of June 2023, David, Constitution and rules we must follow, McCarthy wrote to the rest of the team, "We need to highlight anything of a sensitive political nature in the work. It's not necessary to read everything, but if the work focuses on China, Taiwan, Tibet or other topics that may be an issue in China, that needs to be highlighted so that we can determine if it is safe to put it on the ballot or if the law will require us to make an administrative decision about it." Diane Lacey, the person part of the admin team who leaked the emails to Barkley and Stanford, makes their task clear as day in a statement to the journalists. "We were told to vet nominees for work focusing on China, Tibet or other topics that may be an issue in China, and to my shame, I did so." Oh, look what we have here. A bona fide scandal. In anticipation of the Chinese government's disapproval, McCarthy and the admin team involved in managing the voting process of the award excluded any writer or works they thought the Chinese government would not like. Last I checked, writing or speaking out in a way that the CPC would take offense to was not a rule of disqualification in the Hugo Awards. The terrible implication of this discovery is evident. McCarthy's administrative meddling effectively took away the opportunities and success that the excluded writers may have had and had been completely deserving of otherwise. Let's remember that winning awards and even getting shortlisted is likely to boost book sales. It can give welcome publicity to a less established author, and it can add legitimacy to their career as a writer. Most egregiously, the admin team's censorship betrays the integrity of championing good literature and calls into question the Hugo Awards' legitimacy in being able to be trusted to do the championing. This controversy suggests that political considerations should take precedent over celebrating the books the sci-fi community took the time to nominate and praise. And can you imagine how the winners might feel, knowing that their win might have only been possible because the competition was deemed unfavourable to the government of the country hosting the event? So we found how the political considerations of the administrative body managing a literary event was caught hindering the progress of the affected writers. But what about the idiocy I promised? How is this not just like what the RSL is allegedly doing, hiding their political considerations while at the same time applying them behind the scenes in a way that is surreptitious, deceptive, and in betrayal of free-minded literary expression? The element of idiocy resides in the fact that, unsatisfied in interfering with the voting process of the competition and in support of the stereotype that all admin officials are useless at their job, these bureaucrats of literary taste couldn't even censor the writers accurately. Within the leaked emails, Zhao's name was misspelled twice, and the title of their debut novel, The Iron Widow, was mixed up with The Iron Giant, the sci-fi children's film made in 1999. And remember me mentioning that Wei Me went to Tibet? Well, it turns out that he actually went to Nepal. The person who did travel to Tibet, you know, the place with the complex and controversial history of alleged Chinese colonialism, was Ursula Vernon, aka T. Kingfisher, the author of Nettle and Bone. And as you might have noticed, Nettle and Bone not only was seen as eligible for the voting ballot, but in fact won the biggest award of the night. Some people have speculated that the Chinese government made no indication for these disqualifications to take place, though others have mentioned that vague intimations of censorship is the CPC's MO. People have also suggested that censorship pressures may have come not from the government but from business interests who appear to have taken over the management of the Chengdu Worldcon from the original fan organizers. Whatever the pressure might have been, the answer is simple. As this article from this student paper talking about the scandal has stated, if hosting the awards in any given location would necessitate censorship, the award should not be hosted in that location. Failing to uphold this frankly low standard places the legitimacy of future Hugo Awards and other literature competitions that mistake admin secrecy for ceremonious mystique into serious doubt. Waving goodbye to the Sichuan pepper-infused cuisine and traditional wooden tea shops of Chengdu, we're flying back to the green fields and grey cities of Britain, and this summer, where our last literary controversy takes place. Where our other two controversies had the political attack coming from the inside of the literary administration, the chain of events I'm about to tell you will be about a political attack from the outside, and the failure of a weak establishment to protect its writers from antagonistic forces. Taking advantage of the Sun's more compassionate, though completely non-committal, impulse to shine at this time of year, the literary establishment takes its chances with the forecast and sets up multiple literary festivals across the UK, the majority of them hosted in the months between May and September. These festivals are a book lover and aspiring writer's dream. Among other things, they provide a stage for established and up-and-coming authors to talk about their latest works. They offer writing and publishing workshops, schedule conversations about literature and the wider culture that influence it, and provide spaces for readers to get their books signed. With the first literary festival starting in 1949, these festivals have grown to the point that many of them attract thousands of introverted festival goers clutching their books to their chest to keep in their social anxiety, both from the UK and beyond. Giving up for another bookish bonanza this year was the Edinburgh International Literary Festival, one of the biggest literary festivals in the UK. And if all goes well, it truly would be a bonanza. In 2022, for example, the Edinburgh Lit Fest was able to boast of 100,000 tickets sold for the event. But even in April of this year, 5 months away from when Edinburgh Lit Fest opens its doors, there was a chill in the air. And it wasn't from Scotland's habitually cool climate. A trepidation had set into the bones of the festival like an untreated case of tuberculosis, historically known as the artist's disease, and the cause is proving itself just as deadly. This disease had first been diagnosed all the way back in July of last year, when an unforgiving spotlight had been placed on one of Edinburgh Lit Fest's leading financial sponsors, Baillie Gifford. In late July 2023, the Scottish investigative media outlet The Ferret published an article on how the investment management company had invested up to £5 billion in fossil fuels. The significance of this finding was that year, Greta Thunberg, the famous eco-activist, was announced to attend a talk at the festival. Thunberg pulled out of the event days later, citing the reason for her cancellation being that she believed Baillie Gifford was guilty of greenwashing, that is, presenting the image that their company is more climate conscious than it really is. Thunberg's dropping out brought on a frenzy of established writers and adventurers, including Zadie Smith and Ali Smith, to sign, everyone say it with me now, an open letter supported by the new campaign group Fossil Free Books, created right after the 2023 Edinburgh Lit Fest had concluded in late August. This letter details a little bit more of their problem with Baillie Gifford. The letter asserted that the corporations that the investment management company invests in are making huge profits from global disaster, and hide behind esteemed cultural institutions like the Edinburgh Book Festival as sanction for its continued operations. The letter also stated their collective demands as impossible as they are simple to list. The investment management company must stop investing in fossil fuel-linked businesses, and if not, the book festival should find alternative sponsors for the next year. And like all good unmeetable demands, this one also came with a barely veiled threat. If these demands are not met, the letter asked all of the attending authors to boycott the festival for 2024. Coming back to April of this year, the organisers for the upcoming festival quivered in their boots. They changed their director, Nick Barley, who ran the festival for 14 years, to Jenny Niven, the founder of a forward-thinking and progressive spoken word and poetry festival, Push the Boat Out. They also made the upcoming festival centre around the theme Future Tense, in hopes to open a space to engage with the many big systemic challenges across politics, economics and climate. But they also tried to be brave. They continued with the decision to keep Baillie Gifford as their sponsor, and with wringing hands hinted at the potential unwanted consequences that coming after one of the biggest commercial sponsors for literary festivals throughout the UK might bring. We need to be really careful what we wish for, Niven said in a Guardian article in April. She states that there have been cases where funding has disappeared and projects have just stopped. And as a main sponsor of not only Edinburgh Lit Fest, but many other large literary festivals in the UK, including the Hay Festival, arguably the most famous UK literary festival, and the Cheltenham Literary Festival, the oldest in Britain, the dropping of Baillie Gifford's sponsorship would have wide-ranging effects on all major literary festivals throughout the UK. The main players have been introduced. The organisers of the Edinburgh Lit Fest, whose literary festival is being threatened with a boycott and protest because of their main financial sponsor. Then there is the protest group in question, Fossil Free Books, who have made it clear they will protest the festival if their demands are not met. And we also have Baillie Gifford, the investment management company and sponsor, the cause of the controversy. Of course, though Fossil Free Books believe divestment from fossil fuels by Baillie Gifford should be achievable because the fossil fuels make up a small percentage of their portfolio, this is, to be frank, stupid, short-sighted, and authoritarian thinking. In fact, FFB, targeting literary festival sponsors in general, but especially ones like Baillie Gifford, is exactly the type of dumb politics that is threatening the current literary landscape and taking away opportunities from writers who rely on these events for the paycheck and the publicity they provide. For one, asking Baillie Gifford to divest of all their fossil fuel investments is literally not possible because they are managers of other people's money, not their own, so they can't make ethical decisions on behalf of their clients. The ridiculousness of FFB's boycott reaches a fever pitch when you realise how much of a softball going after the investment management firm is compared to almost every other corporation. A few facts for you. Though 2% of Baillie Gifford's client money is invested in fossil fuel companies, this is far below the 11% industry average of fossil fuel investments. What more, far more of their clients' money, 25% in fact, is invested in ways that explicitly support a transition to clean energy. Also, the FFB's open letter spoke of Norway's sovereign wealth fund as an example of an institutional investor being the vanguard of a fossil-free future. The only issue is, Norway, in an absurdist turn of events, is one of the largest suppliers of oil for all of Europe. Norway is completely reliant on the production and investment of oil. Like the Hugo Awards' admin team, FFB are poorly researching and misapplying their political agenda at the cost of the writers. FFB also somehow tacked into their letter complaints of Baillie Gifford's investment being linked to Israel. But then so are Amazon and huge tech companies like Nvidia, Alphabet and Meta. And yet somehow we haven't heard FFB calling for the complete boycott of Google, and they'll happily have an Instagram account to promote their protests. Which begs the question, why is it okay to utilize products and services from companies that they would deem complicit in ecological or political issues only when it's useful for them, but not when it's not deemed necessary for the group, even though their target is doing a lot more for their cause than the corporations they do utilize and use? And then they have the gall to say this in a tweet: "We love our literary festival dearly. It's a privilege to share work with readers. but not at the expense of lives and human rights. We believe literary festivals plus events that do not accept funding from institutions complicit in human rights abuses is possible and necessary. If they truly believed that, they wouldn't be tweeting in the first place. That, along with everything else in the modern world, would be part of their boycott. This sort of hypocritical thinking is impossible to avoid when an activist group's only method of action is self-righteous grandstanding on ecological and political issues without the icky yucky messy work of considering the pragmatics and logistics of what you are actually protesting for. There's also something else we can get from this politely worded insidious tweet. They are baying for blood. And if taking money from a sponsor who have small and distant connections to fossil fuels would mean that literary festivals would carry on, well then, I suppose literary festivals will have to breathe their last. Taking all this into account, in April, Edinburgh Lit Fest made the decision that they will keep their sponsor. Clearly, listening to the unhinged and ill-researched demands of a threatening pressure group on the hunt for a cultural event's main financial sponsor is not a rational choice. But they were still worried, and it turns out they had every right to be. Only 1 month later, on Friday the 24th of May, the Hay Festival, also being threatened with boycotts and protests, bowed to the pressure and dropped Baillie Gifford as their sponsor. After seeing how more than 700 already established writers who all to some extent have already made a name for themselves, had signed another open letter agreeing to boycott the event if FFB's demands were left unmet, the organisers of Edinburgh Lit Fest finally agreed to drop Baillie Gifford as their sponsor on Thursday the 30th of May. This is despite it leaving a huge financial gap in the funding for any future events. Like any good story with Chekhov's gun, the chamber inevitably releases its round. Though some of the literary festivals, like Wigtown Festival, would have kept Baillie Gifford as a sponsor, the damage had been done. By the 6th of June, Baillie Gifford cancelled all remaining financial support for the literary festivals that they used to sponsor. A spokesperson for the investment firm stated that they hold the activists squarely responsible for the inhibiting effect their action will have on funding for the arts in this country. Practically, this means that at least 7 of the biggest literary festivals in the UK have been left with a huge chunk out of their budget, putting into question whether they'll even have the funds to put on their events for the next year, let alone to the same size and accessibility they had the ability to do before. Especially since the privilege of sponsoring literary festivals and other cultural events may not be looking particularly appeasing to other corporate firms who may be fearful of becoming the group's next target. And as if we didn't have enough of them already in this video, another open letter was sent to the Scotsman, signed by nearly 70 well-known authors, including Val McDermid and Alexander McCall Smith, criticising the perverse and deeply retrograde impact that the protests had over the sponsorship of Edinburgh Lit Fest, warning that the loss of the sponsorship will merely deprive writers and activists of platform and influence. How nice for this open letter to come right after the decision had been made for Edinburgh Lit Fest to drop its sponsor. Though it would have been even nicer for established writers to have publicly supported the organisers when the pressure from the protesters had not yet reached its fever pitch and their ill-thought-out demands could still be combated. But the organisers of these literary festivals are not without fault either. As a literary festival, they should have had the courage to stand up against political bullies who only care about their own self-righteous attitude and not the practicalities of discouraging the biggest funder of literary festivals to continue their unconditional sponsorship. As John McLellan commented in this article in The Scotsman, through their willingness to fold in the face of this threat, the Edinburgh Lit Fest has become a prisoner of a narrow way of thinking. As organisers of one of the biggest literary festivals in the UK, at least for now, they had the responsibility of upholding the importance of free discourse for writers and readers, a responsibility they failed to uphold. And once again, the people who are the most affected by the loss of these festivals' funding are aspiring writers or writers just starting out who are relying on the events at these festivals to progress their career, and those who would benefit from philanthropic initiatives such as providing free tickets, transport, and books to children attending the festival on school trips. Censorship is becoming more and more normalised in literary spaces. The managers and organisers of our literary establishment are those who we, the public, should be able to trust to uphold the necessary elements needed for producing good literature. That is, the freedom of thought, expression and creativity without the fear of financial, social and or physical retribution. Instead, it is the inner chambers of our literary establishment who are the ones using hidden, bullyish and at a lot of times incompetent pushing of politics and agendas, or otherwise just bowing down to the pressure of these things from outside forces. This all results in the severe debilitation of opportunities and financial support for new and less well-known writers, and more fundamentally, the upholding of truthful, beautiful literature. This all cripples a writer's ability to write what they think is good art, and steals from the reader the opportunity to think and judge for themselves whether that is truly the case.